Liberation Music Therapist, a teaching podcast outlining 30 key concepts for liberation music therapy. I'm Dorian Wallace, a composer, pianist, and board-certified music therapist. My work spans prisons, hospice care, marginalized communities, labor groups, artist communities, and survivors of abusive power and coercive control. Because of these experiences, I've witnessed the pressing need for systemic change. In this podcast, we will explore the intersections of music therapy and liberation movements, as well as theory and practice as a vehicle to help strengthen resilience across our global community and address the systemic roots of the mental health crisis. Through theory and applied practice, music can be a valuable resource and practice in developing coherent practical strategies that demystify capitalist realism. Thank you for taking your mental health seriously. Thank you for taking our community seriously. Thank you for taking collective struggle seriously. Solidarity forever. Series 1, Introduction to Liberation Music Therapy. Episode 1, Introduction to the Podcast. Welcome to the Liberation Music Therapist podcast. I'm Dorian Wallace, he, him, a composer, pianist, and board-certified music therapist. My work combines trauma-informed music therapy with radical theory, and I collaborate particularly within marginalized communities and spaces. In this series, I'll lay out how various political frameworks, liberation movements, psychological methodologies, and music insights can inform creativity in trauma-informed activism and organizing. I make the argument that capitalism and its global consequences via its profit motive and practice of colonialism create conditions and exacerbate mental health crises by creating environments of alienation, stress, anxiety, and depression, depleting resources while exacerbating the climate crisis, and making healthcare inaccessible for most people. Understanding the link between these crises and societal structures is essential for developing effective strategies. The creative arts, particularly music, possess inherent healing qualities that, when applied with intention and focus, can contribute to collective somatic healing from the effects of capitalist realism. This podcast is both an exploration and a manifesto for music therapists, mental health professionals, activists, organizers, and others interested in challenging oppression and fostering collective healing. While liberation music therapy isn't yet an established school of thought, it's the application of music therapy in support of liberation movements working to dismantle oppression, reclaim autonomy, and promote healing. That's what we're doing here. So this podcast is for educational purposes only and not a substitute for mental health advice. The opinions and interpretations are of the host and the host alone. I speak everything in good faith. Thank you for listening. So a couple of podcast discretions. The primary goal of this podcast is to educate activists and organizers about music therapy and introduce music therapists and other mental health professionals to liberation social theory while laying a foundation to anyone else interested in music and using music in social spaces. So it's really... The aim is to demystify capitalist realism, the underlying false belief that capitalism is the only viable system, and explore how this phenomenon influences activism, music therapy practices, and our understanding of healing and mental health. I aim to break down these ideas in an accessible way, offering a critical framework to examine how capitalist ideologies shape our work and limit possibilities for liberation. This podcast draws from diverse fields, including liberation psychology, post-colonialism, indigenous thought, ethnomusicology, feminism, Marxism, anarchism, community music therapy, liberation theology, critical theory, critical pedagogy, psychoanalysts, analytical music therapy, cultural studies, cultic studies, existentialism, and Buddhism. I'll do my best to cite sources. However, just to be completely frank with y'all, academic rigor is not my most developed skill set. So regard this podcast as a coherent framing of concepts for further analysis, further critique, and further development. I'll share personal experiences from my work as a music therapist in carceral settings, in cultic recovery, in hospice care, as well as working with marginalized or unique or special populations, such as sex workers, religious exiles, disillusioned military veterans, etc. I'll offer insights from my career as a composer and pianist as well as the embodied approaches of music making that influence my practice both personally and professionally. Before we begin the podcast, I want to acknowledge that we are gathering, even digitally, on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded lands of the Munsee Lenape people. Lenapehoking, or homelands of the Lenape, was stewarded by Lenape people for generations, and their active stewardship is still present today. I want to recognize the ongoing struggles faced by indigenous communities and pay respect to all Lenape people, the original stewards of this land. This podcast is committed to supporting indigenous sovereignty and the rights of all indigenous people. As we engage together in this course, let us reflect on our responsibilities to this land and to each other as we work towards justice and deep, healthy healing for all. The Lenni Lenape, or Delaware people, are an indigenous nation from the northeastern woodlands. Lenapehoking is rich in resources, which have supported their agricultural economies for millennia. The Lenape Nation was organized into towns, including the Munsee, who played a key role in early interactions with Europeans. The Munsee towns were located between the southern Lenape and the Iroquois Confederacy. These towns were among the first to encounter colonizers from Europe in the 1500s. By the 1700s, many Munsee and other Lenape were forcibly displaced westward by capitalist-funded colonizers, some joining other groups along the Ohio River or relocating to Canada. Diseases from Europe, fraudulent treaties, and colonial encroachment devastated Lenapehoking, leading to the marginalization of the Lenape people. The 1758 Treaty of Easton formalized the loss of significant Lenape lands, contributing to their eventual displacement from the Eastern Territories. The American Revolution from 1775 to 1783 created complicated divisions within the community, as some sided with the British, others with the colonists, while many wanted to remain neutral or non-engaged. Along with the political chaos of the war, it weakened the Lenape's community's ability to resist further encroachment and displacement. Today, many descendants of the original inhabitants of Lenapehoking live in present-day Oklahoma, Ontario, and Wisconsin, where they continue to maintain strong communities. My ancestors were involved, both directly and indirectly, in the settler colonial project funded by European capitalists, contributing to the centuries-long removal and oppression of the Lenape and other indigenous peoples on this stolen land. I encourage you to learn more about the Stockbridge Munsee community in Wisconsin, a federally recognized tribe, and considering offering support in any way that you can. It is something as descendants of colonizers and settlers of this land, we have to work towards creating reparations towards the indigenous nations of this land and the people. Respectfully, the Lenape community embodies a resilience that deserves respect and recognition, and we must contribute in any way we can. I also want to acknowledge how my background has shaped my lived experiences and perspective. As of current recording in 2024, I am a 38-year-old white heterosexual cisgender man from a lower working class background in the Midwest United States, raised in a conservative, mostly Republican United Methodist family. Given my location of birth, many of my resources and experiences come with an American-centric bias, which should be taken into consideration. My family is very musical, and I grew up surrounded by music, largely self-taught. This led me to where I am today, living in New York City and making a living as a composer and pianist, primarily playing and teaching for various dance companies. I also served 11 years in the United States Army National Guard, which had a significant impact on my political development. I identify politically as a socialist, humanist, and spiritually as an agnostic. I also practice Vipassana meditation in the Theravada Buddhist tradition. I am a survivor of severe interpersonal violence and have since struggled with PTSD for the majority of my adult life. Additionally, I am a recovering alcoholic and have been sober for 5 years. I acknowledge that my ancestors contributed to the oppression of marginalized communities, and I am committed to working towards reparations, healing, and justice. This platform is dedicated to exploring liberation, music therapy, and collective healing. I am welcome to constructive criticism and different perspectives as I aim to contribute to a trauma-informed, class-conscious movement for global justice. By sharing my positionality, I hope to foster transparency. I invite you to join me on this journey of growth and understanding, always keeping the mission at the center. Thank you. Solidarity forever. So that lays down a lot of what I wanted to get out just before getting into this podcast. I wanted to explore what exactly we're going to be covering. So the podcast is really going to be broken up into 8 series. So the first series is Introduction to Liberation Music Therapy. The second series is Approaches to Trauma and Healing. The third series is Social Forces and Political Context. The fourth series is Music, Identity, and Socio-Political Context. We're also going to go into Series 5, which is Critical Analysis and Addressing Power. Series 6, which is Social Action and Pedagogy in Music Therapy. Series 7, which is Clinical Practice and Applied Liberation Music Therapy. And then Series 8 is really going to be conclusion and future directions. So with all of that said, what is the purpose of this podcast? So my experiences with music have been deep and personal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first share more of an ad-lib response on my personal connection for doing this project and why I want to do this project. So I've been a composer and piano player for the entire time I have really been alive, but professionally by trade, that's what I've done here in New York City for the past almost 15 years. I made a decent living doing it. I've had a decent success in whatever areas that avant-garde composers and improvising pianists can make. But yeah, I've been very happy with my career in regards to where it has gotten me and all of those elements. I also, during my experience in the military, there were a couple of significant things that took place. So first and foremost, I want to be clear. I was in the Army in the National Guard for 11 years, and I served in 2 military units. They were band units. I played piano for the Army, which gave me a lot of very interesting experiences. One of the jokes is that I came in to the military as a Republican and I left the military as a socialist. And though that is sort of a funny way to think about it, it is also very accurate to sort of my transition and growth politically. So the short version is I'm from a small town in the Midwest, and music had been a part of my life forever. I was from a very musical family. Music was everywhere. And because of that environment, though I didn't really have formal lessons, I mean, I had some lessons with my mom, but in general, I was really self-taught, improvising and exploring, playing things by ear. So because of that, I didn't really learn how to read music until much later in life. So, I mean, give or take, I started playing probably around age 4. Started, I'd say, like, legit composing at age 7. And then actually really started to take the instrument much more seriously around age 13. By the time I was maybe 17, I ended up going and taking some classes, music theory classes, at the local college in the area, and began to learn the basics of music theory and reading music. So I guess, like, really, I'd been playing about 13 or 14 years by the time I started to learn some formal things. And that had a big impact just because it helped expand the concepts of how to interpret and understand music. But to just fly through all of this, I ended up then getting formal training. I ended up going to school for music. I dropped out of music school because I was not doing well, to be very frank. I was just not doing well at school. I did not feel comfortable in the academic environment. Just all of those matters were a part of it. Zero disrespect to any of my professors. I actually loved my professors, and I loved the resources and the knowledge that I learned from them. But just, I wasn't ready for college, just to be very frank. I ended up leaving college and joining the Army, which is where we're getting to. Partially due to my background, I thought I was politically conservative, just because that was what I was around. That was what I was surrounded by. And it really wasn't until the military that I started to understand the actual context of global conflict and war. It wasn't a fantasy anymore. It was like, okay, I see what this actually is. So really, it was about this time that I really began to experience different cultures, different populations. I was a northerner, so I was all of a sudden around a lot of southern folks, a lot of East Coasters, a lot of West Coasters, a lot of, like, really deep Midwesterners, Southwesterners, you know, all over the country. It also really was the first time I was not in white majority spaces. I was all of a sudden around many people of color, which had two sort of impacts. The first was the notice that it was like, wow, when we need diversity and inclusion, something that all these organizations that I see are striving for and then never actually do. But when we need people to kill for the government or kill for capitalism, it's very, very easy to have diversity. So that was one thing that I noticed. And the second thing was, hey, where are all of the rich kids? So it was noticeable that everyone there, not literally everybody, there were a couple of prep school kids that were there, but everyone was either working class, middle class, or lower class. And so that was just a big eye-opener. It also was one of the first times, like my battle buddy, my bunkmate also had a history within organized street culture, is the way I'll describe it, prior to his enlistment into the military. And so it was really one of the first times that I not only experienced somebody who was gang associated, but also learned how many of my stereotypes were completely wrong. Just all the stereotypes of everything I was around. The first being that this dude was incredibly funny and incredibly smart. And that shocked me. And I know it sounds offensive. It can sound very offensive, but it really was like, oh my God, like I had this image in my mind on what someone from this social class would be like. And I was wrong, like entirely. And the other part was just understanding and learning some of his stories and experiences. I realized that had I been born in the exact same circumstance, exact same situation, exact same ethnicity, every piece of that, if I had been born in his shoes, I would have absolutely been involved in similar things. And so that was a big eye-opener, that my location, where I was born and how I was born, and when I was born, impacted much more of my life decisions than I wanted to be, than I was willing to admit at the time. This also was a time where I was exposed to the realities of what happens when we say we go to war or when we invade a country, which is that we go and we kill people. And we have people killed on our side and on the other side. There is serious ethical issues that I started to become aware of, that I am embarrassed to say, but just came to realize that I did not agree with the Iraq War whatsoever. And, you know, I was never deployed. I want to make that clear. But what I did was I played a lot of deployment ceremonies, return home ceremonies, funerals, public events, those sorts of things. So I saw a lot of the impact, meaning I saw the impact on family members of unnecessary death. I witnessed a lot of political speeches that were really used to justify why we were in Iraq and why we were in Afghanistan. I also just started to really know the complexities of the psychological impact of having so many friends, battle buddies, comrades of mine develop serious PTSD for not just the act of almost being killed, but actually the act of killing itself. Yeah. And then I'll say two more major impactful experiences in the military that's going to lead us to this podcast. Well, to the development to this podcast. The first one was just whenever I would go out with some of my fellow service members, men of color specifically. We would go out, and there was just a very noticeable difference with how they would be treated when they wore their military uniforms, like when we would all go out in uniform, versus when we would all go out in civilian clothes, regular clothes. And a lot of them just started, they would get treated differently, like get followed around. I have a really specific memory of a friend of mine being followed and watched by the security guy at a CVS or a Walgreens or whatever it was, and I was very irritated and bothered and pissed off by it, but my friend was like, dude, chill, like, it's fine, it happens, it's normal. I was like, what do you mean it's normal? But yeah, so that was a significant moment. But the other was the murder of Michael Brown. Now, if listeners of this podcast are not familiar with that story, basically, in 2014, there was an 18-year-old man who was shot and killed by a police officer named Dorian Wilson. I believe that the officer he fired a total of 12 bullets and shot Michael Brown 6 times, which just didn't sit right with me, because I was in the military at the time, and I remember just at the time still being conservative ideologically, and just thinking, it's like, oh, that's fucking so clearly a murder. Like, that's not self-defense. That is state violence. That's state power being inflicted on a civilian, or like unnecessary force. Like, it just being shot 6 times. Like, what are you doing? That was my thoughts just from hearing it. But to my shock and horror, there were so many people that from my community, hometown community, family community, fellow service members, who just did not have that worldview and took the side of the police officer for the sake of them being a police officer. Like, that was the argument. And keep in mind, at this point in time, I wasn't where I am politically today, but the whole realization was that people were more willing, in my personal circle, were willing to forgive the act of murder just by nature of the uniform that the person was wearing and by nature of who the victim was. Now, I'm not a legal expert. I am not going to, go into any further information regarding that event in regards to legality or just any of that. But what I am going to say is that was my initial response at the time. Just being like, what? Why are people defending the state? Like, without any question. That's not right. And like, this is a person who was murdered. Like, what? So that became a big shift. I was also a professional composer at the time in New York City, and so a lot of my music took a political turn. Even though my audience is extremely small in the grand scheme of it, I still have enough of an audience that had a pretty decent social media following and had decent amount of attendance at all of my performances, and had, media exposure for various independent music outlets and things like that. So it just became oriented that due to that position, that platform, it was important to spread political messaging. So I'm not going to get into my history as a composer for this podcast, but you can look up my stuff if you really want to learn more about it. But anyways, my music became much, much, much more politically minded, and I started to really become disengaged with the military, disengaged with the entire conservative ideology, just started to disengage from all of it, because it just wasn't who I was. It just was like, wait a second, none of this aligns with my values. I've only been this because I was told to, and I don't agree with any of it. So anyways, a slight change, but I started to, I had a friend in the military who was a music therapist, actually, and he showed me a couple of YouTube videos of music therapy being used in the VA, specifically the Veterans Affairs. And it just really blew my mind, seeing music being used in that sort of way. So I ended up going back to school, because I had dropped out of music school, and joined the Army and moved to New York, basically not exactly the same time, but around the same time. And ended up going back to school for music therapy, with the original intention of focusing on veterans. However, the more and more and more involved I got with the learning and studying, and how all of this just develops, I started really being drawn towards working within incarcerated spaces, mostly because that is a population that I just was really feeling drawn towards in regards to the pain that they're feeling while locked up, and also for the reasons that got them locked up. But also just on a personal note, when you study really any mental health profession, but one piece of advice is that you have to understand where your limits and boundaries are. And I just, for whatever reason, didn't feel an extreme amount of, let me put it this way. I felt like I had a certain resiliency within incarcerated spaces, partially due to my military background and partially due to my political activism, that I felt a calling to be in the space. And the other part to it is that politically, I'm a prison abolitionist, and we'll get into this down the podcast, but people are still locked up, and somebody needs to be in there. And so if someone can be in there who is going to be on the benefit of the people locked up, then it it should be me. And so that was really the thought process. I also, just to be clear, I do work in hospice care 1 day a week for just a 4-hour shift. It's people at end-of-life care, basically people in their deathbeds, which has been a really remarkable experience in and of itself. It's actually been almost a weird therapeutic balance between the incarcerated spaces, partially because when you see death at a beautiful moment like hospice care, you can almost appreciate it more when you've seen life taken away so quickly and so violently in the carceral spaces. But I also do try to provide services for various underrepresented groups or sort of special populations. So I do recovery work for people who are exiting cultic groups or high control groups, abusive relationships, those sorts of categories, gangs, hate groups, really any kind of high control environment, and specifically work with clients on how to reframe the music that was part of their abuse and part of their trauma as a association with the group. And so it's about reclaiming and rebuilding your independence. And I use my specialization of music as an area with that sort of population, as well as like I just did a webinar, an educational webinar for sex workers, that people who work in the adult film industry. I'm not involved in that field whatsoever, the industry whatsoever. But it's a group that the way our structure is, our societal structure is set up, they're not really respected and not treated well. And so I offered like a educational workshop with them. So that's just a little bit about myself and why I'm doing what I'm doing. Now, the purpose for this podcast is, over time, having real world field experience, working on as either a music therapist in prison settings, or being around radical political spaces, Black liberation spaces, abolitionist movements and whatnot, as well as cult recovery. I've just really learned a lot of various things and ideas that can really support one another. For instance, having a more solid understanding of social theory impacts the way that you're going to approach a client or approach somebody who you're working with. It's also going to impact your interpretation, and so this is partially about becoming aware of your own biases and how you impact the work that you're involved with. Another area is that we're gaining a lot of insight right now in the mental health fields, specifically around trauma therapy and utilizing a lot of somatic practices. That is, seeing a lot of results that are actually tangible. There should also be a social component to it. And the reason I put it this way is, though individuals require healing on an individual level, them as individual humans, they may require individual treatment, individual experience, individual therapy. There needs to be the awareness that no amount of therapy and no amount of mindfulness exercises and coping exercises is going to help a person if they're starving or if they're living in an extremely violent situation, whether it be due to the community that they live in, or due to their identity, or due to other factors like family violence or high control. And so really this is about me trying to create a space to get all of these ideas out. I'm not the strongest writer. I'm not the strongest academic, but I am a very good on the grounds person in regards to person-to-person engagement, and I also do have a pretty strong intuition. This is not, I do not want this to be oriented around following that in and of itself. What I'm saying is that due to my lived experience and field experience, I want to get a lot of this theoretical knowledge and practical knowledge into one coherent place so that other people with different skill sets can either reject, apply, or expand and develop some of these ideas and foundations. So that's really what this is about. So starting with the next episode is going to be a ritual oriented for grounding, and that's really what it's going to be. But the I guess we'll call it the course begins on episode 3. So you're more than welcome to skip episode 2 because that's more of an artistic and spiritual grounding. But episode 3, that's the beginning, which is Foundations of Music Therapy, followed by episode 4, which is Introduction to Liberation Psychology. Thank you for listening to the Liberation Music Therapist podcast. Your listenership and support helps sustain this project. If you are able to support financially, visit patreon.com/DoriansMode and contribute $5 a month. This will grant you access to premium podcast episodes, a premium subscription to the Dorian's Mode Substack newsletter and all the perks included with that, admission to the monthly listening club, and an open invitation to my monthly online music wellness group. Every contribution helps sustain and grow this body of work. Other ways to support include liking and subscribing. While I'm not active on social media, you can follow my writing on Substack at doriansmode.substack.com for more information regarding my meditation courses, music therapy workshops, music compositional work, and solo piano work. Visit my website at www.dorianwallace.com. I appreciate your support. Thank you for taking your mental health seriously. Thank you for taking our community seriously. Thank you for taking collective struggle seriously. Solidarity forever.